Hey guys, it's me, Richard. You know, my school is pretty boring. I mean, who doesn't dread the same old routine day after day? The morning announcements, the dull lectures, and the endless homework. It's enough to make anyone lose their mind. But one day, I decided enough was enough. I needed a break from the monotony, something that would shake things up and make the school year memorable. So, I hatched this crazy plan. I was going to create chaos. I wanted to turn my dull school life into a wild adventure. One that my classmates and maybe even the teachers would never forget. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? Getting suspended? I was ready for anything. So, buckle up as I take you through the most chaotic day of my life where laughter, mayhem, and a whole lot of color collided. Trust me, you don't want to miss this.
The sun streamed through the curtains of Richard's bedroom, illuminating the chaotic space filled with posters of video games and his favorite rock bands. An alarm clock blared insistently, the bright red numbers reading 7:30 a.m. Richard, a scruffy 17-year-old with tousled hair and a mischievous glint in his eye, groaned as he rolled over in bed. His heart raced as he blinked at the time, panic setting in. "Oh no, I'm going to be late!" he exclaimed, bolting upright and throwing off the covers. He leaped out of bed, landing awkwardly on the floor, narrowly avoiding a pile of dirty laundry. With a sense of urgency, he rushed to his closet, flinging clothes aside in a desperate search for something to wear. After a moment of chaos, he settled on a slightly wrinkled graphic tee featuring a classic video game character and a pair of jeans that he hoped still smelled somewhat fresh. In his haste, he darted into the bathroom, bursting through the door just as his younger sister, Sophie, was brushing her teeth. She shot him an annoyed glare through the mirror, her mouth full of toothpaste. "Can't you knock?" she mumbled, foaming slightly. "No time. Gotta look somewhat presentable," Richard replied, his voice urgent. He grabbed a toothbrush, furiously brushing his teeth while attempting to comb his hair with the other hand. The routine quickly devolved into chaos as he accidentally knocked over a bottle of shampoo, sending it crashing to the floor with a loud thud. "Richard!" Sophie yelled, splashing some water in frustration. "Sorry," he called back, rinsing his mouth just as he heard the faint sound of the school bus honking outside. He darted out of the bathroom, making his way to the kitchen, where his mom was preparing breakfast. The smell of toasted bread filled the air, and sick making his stomach growl. "You're going to be late again, aren't you?" his mom said, glancing up from the stove without missing a beat. "Just a little late. I can't help it if my alarm clock has a vendetta against me," Richard replied, grabbing a slice of toast and shoving it into his mouth. His eyes darted toward the clock on the wall, which read 8 a.m. "Gotta go. Love you," he called out, sprinting for the door. He nearly knocked over a stack of mail on his way out, but managed to catch it just in time, tossing it aside carelessly. Outside, Richard arrived at school just as the first bell rang, a sense of exhilaration coursing through him. Students were bustling about, chattering and laughing, but Richard had only one thing on his mind. Today would be the day he broke free from the monotony of school life. Little did he know, chaos was just around the corner. Richard burst through the school gates, a wild grin plastered on his face as he entered the bustling courtyard. The familiar sounds of laughter, chatter, and the occasional shout echoed around him. He could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins, fueled by the chaotic plan brewing in his mind. Today was not going to be just another boring day at school. It was going to be legendary. As he walked through the throng of students, Richard spotted his best friend, Jake. lounging against a tree with a group of their classmates, including Sarah, the girl he had a crush on since forever. He casually swaggered over, trying to act cool, but the excitement bubbling inside him made it hard to keep a straight face. "Hey, Richard, you're late, as usual," Jake teased, tossing an empty soda can toward him. "Yeah, well, my alarm clock decided to throw a party without me," Richard shot back, catching the can with one hand. "But I'm here now, and I'm ready to stir up some trouble." "Trouble? What do you have in mind this time?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow, her interest piqued. Richard leaned in closer, lowering his voice dramatically as if sharing a top-secret plan. "I'm thinking, water balloons in the gym during the assembly." "No way," Jake exclaimed, unable to contain his laughter. "That's epic, but you know Mr. Thompson will go ballistic." "Exactly, that's the point," Richard said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Imagine the chaos! We'll be legends." Just then, the school bell rang, echoing throughout the courtyard and signaling the start of the first period. Students began to shuffle toward the entrance, but Richard wasn't done yet. He looked around, spotting the perfect target, the pristine white statue of the school's founder, Mr. Jenkins, standing majestically in the middle of the courtyard. "All right, everyone, watch this," Richard announced, puffing out his chest as he approached the statue. With a swift motion, he grabbed a nearby plastic flower pot and pretended to present it to the statue as if it were some grand offering. The students around him erupted into laughter, encouraging his antics. Richard dramatically knelt before the statue, saying, "Oh, great, Mr. Jenkins. Accept this humble gift from your most loyal follower." But before he could even finish his sentence, he lost his balance, tumbling forward and knocking the flower pot over. Dirt and flowers exploded everywhere, showering Richard and the surrounding students in a cloud of soil. Laughter erupted around him, and Richard scrambled to his feet, brushing off dirt from his shirt while pretending to be unfazed. "See? I did that on purpose, just giving Mr. Jenkins a fresh look." Sophie, Richard's little sister, who had just arrived with her friends, stood there with wide eyes, mortified. "Richard, what are you doing? You're going to get in trouble." Richard waved her off, still grinning. "Trouble is my middle name." The group burst into laughter again, and Sarah, unable to contain herself, said, "You're ridiculous, Richard." At that moment, Mr. Thompson, the stern gym teacher, marched into the courtyard with a whistle around his neck, his eyes narrowing as he took in the chaos. "What's going on here? Why is the statue covered in dirt? Richard?" Feeling the heat of his teacher's gaze, Richard quickly turned to the group and whispered, "Abort mission! Run!" With that, he bolted toward the school entrance, a chorus of laughter following him as students scattered in all directions, leaving Mr. Thompson to fume at the statue and the mess left behind. Richard dashed inside, exhilarated. Today was just getting started, and he felt invincible. "Time for phase 2 of Operation Chaos," he declared to himself, grinning from ear to ear. The gymnasium was alive with the buzzing energy of students settling into their seats. Banners hung from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the scent of fresh paint and squeaky sneakers. Richard, still riding high on the adrenaline from his earlier antics, slipped into the back of the gym, blending in with the crowd. He was armed with an arsenal of colorful water balloons hidden beneath his jacket, ready to unleash chaos. As the assembly began, Principal Jenkins took the stage, his serious demeanor contrasting sharply with the rowdy atmosphere of the gym. "Welcome, students. Today, we will discuss our upcoming fundraising event, and I expect your full attention." His voice boomed through the microphone, but the students hardly paid attention. Richard exchanged mischievous glances with Jake, who was seated next to him. "You ready for this?" Richard whispered, grinning like a mischievous cat. "Born ready," Jake replied, barely stifling his laughter. As Principal Jenkins droned on about the importance of the fundraiser, Richard felt the impatience rising in the crowd. His classmates whispered, passed notes, and played with their phones. It was the perfect recipe for chaos, and Richard couldn't resist any longer. "All right, it's showtime," he muttered to himself. He discreetly pulled out the first water balloon, feeling the coolness of it in his hand as he glanced around. Timing was everything. He took a deep breath, aimed carefully at the unsuspecting crowd in front of him, and let it fly. The balloon soared through the air and splattered against the wall, showering water everywhere. A wave of shocked gasps echoed through the gym. Principal Jenkins paused mid-sentence, eyebrows raised in confusion. "What was that?" he asked, looking around. Jake, unable to contain himself, burst out laughing. "Richard's giving us a water show!" Richard seized the moment, grabbing another balloon and launching it across the gym. This time, it hit the student council president right in the face, drenching him in bright blue water. The audience erupted in laughter, and the assembly quickly devolved into chaos. "Who threw that?" the president shouted, wiping water from his eyes, but Richard was already on his feet, readying another balloon for launch. With a grin, he yelled, "Catch me if you can!" and launched another balloon, this one aimed at a group of teachers standing near the stage. The balloon exploded, showering them in a rainbow of colors, and one of the teachers, Mrs. Thompson, shrieked, "I'm going to kill you, Richard!" As the gym filled with laughter and screams, Richard began to dodge between rows of seats, launching balloon after balloon, each landing with splashes of water and chaos. The gym turned into a makeshift battlefield, with students ducking for cover, and those brave enough to join in grabbed their own balloons from Richard's stash, joining the fray. "Let's go, Warriors!" Richard shouted, rallying the troops as he threw a balloon that ricocheted off the wall and hit Mr. Thompson squarely on the back of the head. The stern teacher turned around, his face a mix of shock and rage. "Richard!" he bellowed, pointing a finger that trembled with both anger and disbelief. "You are in so much trouble." But Richard, with his quick reflexes, ducked and darted to the side, grabbing another balloon and launching it at the gym's sound system. The balloon hit the speaker, and with a loud pop, it short-circuited, causing the lights to flicker and the microphone to screech. "Nice shot!" Jake hollered, doubling over with laughter. But then Richard's eyes widened as he spotted Sarah in the front row, who had just pulled out her phone to record the chaos. "Sarah, watch out!" he yelled, trying to warn her just as another balloon was launched in her direction. She turned, eyes wide, and the balloon hit her right in the chest, exploding in a shower of water and color. The entire gym burst into laughter, but Richard felt a pang of guilt as he saw her shocked expression. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he called out, but she was already laughing, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "I didn't know you were this good at throwing water balloons," she shouted back, playfully sticking her tongue out at him. Richard's heart raced, not just from the chaos, but also from her smile. With renewed vigor, he grabbed the last of his balloons and ran down the aisle, launching them into the fray as teachers tried to regain control. Principal Jenkins, now soaked and furious, grabbed the microphone, trying to shout above the chaos. "This is unacceptable. Everyone, calm down. Richard, you're going to." But he didn't get to finish before Richard ducked behind the bleachers, taking cover as laughter and shrieks echoed around him. "Let the chaos reign," Richard declared, feeling like a king in his kingdom of mayhem. Just then, a large bucket of confetti fell from the rafters, a result of someone's prank gone wrong. It exploded over the crowd, adding to the bedlam. Richard couldn't help but laugh, realizing that the assembly had turned into the wildest party he'd ever attended. The gym filled with cheers, splashes of water, and the sound of laughter. Richard knew this was only the beginning. The seeds of chaos had been planted, and there was no turning back now. With the chaos of the gymnasium still fresh in his mind, Richard slipped out into the hallway, a grin plastered on his face. The thrill of his water balloon victory surged through him like electricity. He didn't have a plan just yet, but he knew he wanted more. Another target, another chance to stir up trouble. As he strolled down the corridor, he spotted the sign for the computer lab. An idea sparked in his mind. What if he could crash the school's network? The thought was too tantalizing to resist. He reached the door, glancing around to ensure no teachers were watching. The coast was clear. With a quick push, he entered the lab, his heart racing with anticipation. The room was filled with rows of sleek computers, their screens humming softly in the dim light. Richard's eyes gleamed with mischief as he made his way to the nearest workstation. Once there, he sat down, his fingers dancing across the keyboard. "What should I do first?" he wondered aloud, chuckling to himself. Richard had always been a tech whiz, and this was his playground. As he logged into the computer, he felt a sense of power. He had the ability to unleash chaos right from this desk. He opened a web browser and typed in some of his favorite prank sites. His plan? To install a harmless virus that would turn the computers into a digital circus. Just as he was about to click on a link, he heard footsteps approaching. Panic shot through him. There was no time to waste. Richard quickly pulled out a USB drive from his pocket, his secret weapon for chaos. As he plugged it into the computer, the screen flickered ominously. A warning flashed. Warning, potential malware detected. His heart raced. This was his chance to cause some serious trouble. Ignoring the warning, he clicked download. Suddenly, the computer began to beep uncontrollably. Richard cackled with delight as error messages flooded the screen, creating a cacophony of beeping and flashing lights. "Yes! This is going perfectly," he shouted, feeling like a mad scientist in his lab. Then, with a burst of inspiration, he located the audio settings and cranked up the volume, blasting Rise of the Champions through the speakers. The triumphant music filled the room, and Richard jumped up, dancing like he was in a music video. "This is my anthem," he declared, grinning ear to ear. Just then, the door swung open, and Mr. Hargrove, the computer teacher, walked in, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Richard, what do you think you're doing?" he exclaimed, his voice booming in the small room. Richard froze, trying to play it cool. Just conducting some maintenance," he stammered, attempting to mask his excitement with a sheepish grin. "Maintenance? It looks like you're trying to destroy the school's network," Mr. Hargrove shouted, moving quickly toward him, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Feeling cornered, Richard had to think fast. In a moment of sheer panic, he grabbed the USB drive and tossed it toward Mr. Hargrove, hoping to create a distraction. "Catch!" he yelled, but the teacher ducked, narrowly avoiding the flying USB. "Enough of this nonsense," Mr. Hargrove yelled, raising his phone. "I'm calling the principal." Richard's mind raced as he sprinted for the door, his heart pounding. He could hear the teacher's voice echoing behind him, calling for help. Richard bolted into the hallway, his laughter bubbling up uncontrollably. The thrill of his chaotic antics was intoxicating. As he dashed through the corridors, he spotted a group of students hanging out by the lockers, their faces alight with curiosity. "You won't believe what just happened," he exclaimed, breathless from the excitement. "I just crashed the computer lab." "Did you really? That's insane!" one of them replied, eyes wide with admiration. "And I blasted Rise of the Champions like a rock star," Richard added, throwing his arms up in triumph. "Let's keep the party going," Richard declared, feeling like a celebrity in the midst of his fan club. The students cheered, eager to join him in his escapades. Richard knew he couldn't stop now. His school life had turned into an exhilarating adventure, and he was determined to make the most of it. Richard raced down the hallway, his adrenaline pumping through his veins. He could hear the distant sounds of chaos he had created echoing in the school, but his thirst for mischief was far from quenched. He needed to up the ante, and the perfect target had just come into view: the teacher's lounge. As he approached the lounge door, he could hear the muffled chatter of the teachers inside. They were unwinding after the chaos he had already unleashed, blissfully unaware of the storm that was about to hit them. With a wicked grin, Richard pushed the door open, bursting into the room like a whirlwind. "Surprise!" he shouted, throwing his arms wide as if he were the star of a grand performance. The teachers, startled and wide-eyed, turned to face him, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. "Richard, what are you doing in here?" Mrs. Thompson, the math teacher, exclaimed, clutching her coffee cup as if it were a shield. "Just spreading a little joy and chaos," Richard replied, his voice dripping with playful sarcasm. Without waiting for a response, he made a beeline for the snack table, where a platter of cookies lay, inviting and delicious. He grabbed a handful of cookies and began tossing them around the room like confetti. "Cookie cannonball!" he shouted as one cookie landed squarely in Mr. Johnson's hair. "Richard, stop this right now!" Mr. Johnson bellowed, trying to shake the cookie out of his hair, but it was too late. Richard was already on to the next phase of his plan. As the teachers scrambled to clean up the cookie chaos, Richard spotted a large stack of papers on the table. Homework assignments, no doubt. He snatched them up, holding them high above his head like a trophy. "Who needs homework? Let's set these free!" he shouted with glee, scattering the papers all over the room. The teachers gasped, their mouths agape. as Richard gleefully tossed the papers into the air. "Happy homework day!" he laughed, watching as they floated down like confetti. It was a sight to behold. Chaos reigned as the teachers ducked and swatted at the flying papers, their authority undermined by a single student's reckless antics. "What is wrong with you?" Mrs. Thompson exclaimed, exasperation written all over her face. "You're going to get suspended for this." "Suspension? But that's just a vacation." Richard shot back, relishing the sheer audacity of his response. Besides, how often do you get to see a teacher's lounge transformed into a cookie battlefield? Just then, Mr. Hargrove burst through the door, looking furious. "Richard, I thought I told you to stay out of the computer lab." "Did you see the cookies?" Richard countered, pointing at the remnants of his chaotic celebration. "These are far more exciting." Ignoring the chaos surrounding him, Mr. Hargrove's expression hardened. "You're not funny, Richard. This ends now. I'm calling the principal." "Why don't we just call it a Richard's Comedy Hour instead?" Richard suggested, adopting a mock-serious tone. He grabbed a pack of sticky notes from the table and began tossing them at the teachers like mini frisbees. The bright colors clung to their clothes and faces, adding to the mayhem. The teachers, now covered in sticky notes, tried to regain their composure, but laughter began to bubble up despite their best efforts to scold him. Richard's infectious energy and sheer disregard for the rules turned the room into a comedic spectacle. Okay, enough!" Mrs. Thompson finally exclaimed, a reluctant smile creeping onto her face. "We're going to need a cleanup crew for this mess." Richard stepped back, hands on his hips, surveying the chaos he had created. "I'll help, but only if you promise to give me an A for creativity." "More like an F for failure," Mr. Hargrove muttered, trying to hide his amusement. As Richard prepared to make his grand exit, he picked up one last cookie, taking a big bite before tossing the rest behind him like a parting gift. "See you later, teachers. Thanks for the fun." He laughed as he slipped out of the room, leaving behind a whirlwind of crumbs and laughter. After the uproar in the teacher's lounge, Richard's heart raced with excitement. He dashed through the hallways, his mind racing with ideas for more mischief. The thrill of chaos fueled his adrenaline, and he was determined to up the ante. His destination? The computer lab, a haven for technological hijinks. As he approached the lab, Richard peeked through the window. To his delight, he saw that it was empty. The glow of computer screens illuminated the room, casting an eerie yet inviting light. This was his chance. He pushed the door open, stepping inside with the stealth of a ninja. "Finally, a place where I can unleash my true potential," Richard exclaimed to himself, rubbing his hands together in glee. The room was filled with rows of computers, each one gleaming and waiting for his mischievous touch. Richard walked up to the first computer, his mind racing with possibilities. What would be more fun? A harmless virus or a complete shutdown? He mused aloud. He decided to go for the latter. He knew a few tricks from his friends about how to wreak digital havoc, and today was the day to put them to the test. He quickly plugged in his USB drive, which was loaded with harmless prank software he had downloaded earlier. "Let the chaos begin!" he shouted triumphantly, double-clicking the file to launch the virus. As the program began to run, strange sounds erupted from the computer speakers. Blaring horn noises and random animal sounds filled the air. Richard burst into laughter, reveling in the hilarity of it all. "It's a zoo in here," he chuckled, jumping to the next computer to execute the same prank. But just as he was getting into the groove, the door swung open. The computer teacher, Mr. Bennett, strode in with a clipboard in hand, and his expression shifted from neutral to shock as he spotted Richard amidst the chaos. "Richard, what are you doing here?" Mr. Bennett's voice boomed, echoing in the now chaotic lab. Richard froze, his finger hovering over the mouse. Just checking for computer bugs?" he stammered, trying to play innocent, but the grin on his face betrayed him. "Bugs, huh? It looks more like a circus in here." Mr. Bennett shot back, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing as he took in the blaring sounds and Richard's antics. "You're not fooling anyone. You're causing trouble yet again." In a moment of sheer desperation, Richard grabbed a handful of pens and a pencil case from a nearby desk, launching them at Mr. Bennett like projectiles. "Take that, teacher! You can't catch me!" he laughed, dodging to the side and nearly knocking over a computer monitor in the process. Mr. Bennet ducked just in time, his eyes wide with a mix of surprise and anger. "Richard, enough! You're going to regret this." "Oh, really? What are you going to do? Call the principal?" Richard taunted, already preparing for his next move. He grabbed a nearby folder and hurled it into the air, scattering papers everywhere. "Just a little extra paper for the fun." Before Mr. Bennet could respond, Richard took a running start and sprinted toward the door, but not before tossing his USB drive at the teacher in a last-ditch effort to distract him. "Here, take this! It's the key to all my chaos!" he shouted, dashing out of the room. Richard burst into the hallway, laughing hysterically as he sprinted away. He could hear Mr. Bennet's frustrated shout echoing behind him. "You can't escape this time, Richard. I'm reporting you." "Yeah, right. Good luck catching me," Richard yelled back, heart racing with excitement. He loved this adrenaline rush, but he knew he had to find a safe haven before the whole school came after him. Panting and giggling, Richard burst into the bathroom, the door slamming behind him. The moment he entered, he felt the adrenaline begin to dissipate. It was a small sanctuary, a brief respite from the chaotic storm he had unleashed at school. The faint sound of running water from the sinks echoed in the tiled room, and for a moment, he thought he might be safe. "Phew! That was close," he muttered, leaning against the wall and catching his breath. He couldn't help but replay the recent events in his mind. Mr. Bennet's face was priceless. What's next? However, Richard's peace was short-lived. Just as he began to think about his next move, the door creaked open, and in walked a group of students, his classmates, who had heard the ruckus and were on a mission to find him. "There he is! It's Richard!" one of them shouted, pointing directly at him. The others turned, their expressions a mix of anger and amusement. It seemed that not everyone was a fan of Richard's antics. "Richard, you've gone too far this time," another student, Mike, added, crossing his arms. "You need to stop this nonsense. We're all in trouble because of you." Richard tried to play it cool, shrugging nonchalantly. "What? You guys don't appreciate my creative spirit? I thought I was giving everyone a good laugh." He flashed a cheeky grin, but the tension in the room was palpable. "Yeah, well, we're the ones who have to deal with the fallout," said Emily, a girl from his class, rolling her eyes. "Thanks to you, the teachers are furious. They want to suspend you for a month." Richard felt a twinge of guilt, but quickly brushed it off. "Suspension? That's just a badge of honor. Besides, what's life without a little chaos?" He glanced at the exit, pondering his escape route. But just as he began to consider a sprint for freedom, the students closed in on him. "Hey, wait! We're not done with you yet," Mike shouted, stepping closer. "You think you can just run away? We're tired of being your backup for your pranks." "I'm not running away. I'm just planning my next move," Richard replied, his bravado slipping. He could feel the walls closing in around him. "Think, Richard, think." In a moment of desperation, he glanced around the bathroom and spotted the toilets. An idea sparked. "You know what? If you all want to catch me, you're going to have to get through this." Without warning, he ran to the nearest sink and grabbed a cup of water, flinging it toward the group like a ninja warrior. Water splashed everywhere, soaking the front row of his classmates. "Hey!" they shouted, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught. Laughter erupted from Richard as he grabbed another cup, aiming it at Mike, who was now drenched. "Consider this a warning shot. The chaos is just getting started," he declared, laughing uncontrollably. "Get him!" Emily shouted, shaking her head in disbelief, but unable to suppress a giggle herself. Richard dashed toward the row of stalls, throwing open the doors one by one, and he could hear his classmates scrambling after him. He was outnumbered, but that only fueled his excitement. He darted into the last stall, pulling the door closed behind him and locking it just in time. "Richard, come out! We just want to talk!" Mike shouted, now sounding a bit more frantic. "Talk? You guys have a funny way of showing it." Richard shot back from inside the stall, pressing himself against the wall to stifle his laughter. "Why would I come out when I'm clearly the star of the show?" Through the small gap in the stall, he could see shadows moving, and suddenly a cup flew past him and hit the wall. "Uh-oh," he thought, realizing that his classmates weren't just going to let this go easily. They were plotting against him. With his heart racing, he looked around for a way out. There was a window. He quickly climbed onto the toilet, peering out through the small opening. "This is gonna be my escape route," he whispered to himself. But before he could even consider his next move, he heard the bathroom door swing open again. This time, it wasn't just his classmates. The principal, Mr. Johnson, walked in, his stern face scanning the room. "Richard, I know you're in here. You can't hide from me." Mr. Johnson's voice boomed, sending chills down Richard's spine. Game over, Richard thought, realizing that he had underestimated the situation. He needed a plan, and fast. Climbing down from the toilet, he prepared to make a break for it. With a final glance at the door, he whispered, "Time to unleash the ultimate chaos." Then he pushed the stall door open, ready to dive back into the chaos waiting outside. As Richard opened the door, he spilled water over the principal and the students and ran away on the spot. Riding high on the adrenaline from his previous antics, a smile plastered across his face as he made his way down the hall. He could hear the faint thumping of music coming from the gym, where a dance rehearsal was in full swing. This could be my next move, he thought, eyes sparkling with mischief. As he pushed open the gym doors, the vibrant sounds of a pop song hit him like a wall of energy. Students were practicing their dance routine, and the room was filled with colorful lights reflecting off a shiny disco ball. But all of that faded into the background when Richard entered the scene, bursting in like a whirlwind. "Hey everyone, ready for an impromptu performance?" Richard shouted, his voice booming over the music, catching the attention of everyone in the gym. Miss Carter, the dance instructor, turned around, her expression a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "Richard, what are you doing? You can't just barge in here," she exclaimed, but Richard ignored her and marched over to the sound system, glancing at the students who were now watching him with wide eyes. With a swift flick, he turned the volume up to max, playing "The Rise of the Champion" music to create chaos. "Let's dance, people," he yelled, already feeling the rhythm coursing through him. A few students hesitated, but Richard's infectious energy soon had them bobbing their heads to the beat. He started to dance wildly, his moves a chaotic mix of flair and absurdity, grabbing props from a nearby table meant for the upcoming talent show. Colorful wigs, oversized sunglasses, and feather bows. "Who wants to join the madness?" Richard shouted, throwing on a bright pink top hat, fueling the hilarity. One student, Sarah, finally jumped in, donning a wig that nearly covered her eyes. "You're crazy, Richard," she laughed, but her laughter only encouraged him. The gym erupted into laughter as more students joined in, grabbing props and dancing along with Richard. Just as it became a full-blown dance party, Miss Carter stepped in front of him. "Enough! You need to get out of here right now," she shouted, but Richard was undeterred. "I'm the star of this show," he declared, shaking a pair of maracas. The other students erupted into cheers, and Jake spotted a can of confetti, letting it explode across the gym. Colorful paper filled the air, and the excitement skyrocketed. Miss Carter's frustration grew. "Richard, this is absolutely unacceptable," but the students were too caught up in the fun. Just then, Principal Johnson marched in, flanked by several teachers, his expression stern. "What in the world is happening here?" he bellowed. Richard looked back, feeling the pulse of the music echo in his chest. "Uh-oh," he muttered, realizing he might have crossed the line. "You think this is funny? You need to stop this at once," the principal shouted, but Richard laughed and dashed for the exit. As he bolted out the door, Richard felt alive, the adrenaline pumping through him. What's next? The talent show, he mused, excitement bubbling inside him. Today was turning out to be the best kind of chaos. As Richard dashed out of the gym, he was already plotting his next move, feeling invincible. He navigated through the bustling halls, searching for the perfect opportunity to escalate his antics. His eyes landed on the cafeteria, a place teeming with potential for mischief. Inside, the cafeteria was alive with chatter and laughter. Richard surveyed the scene, spotting a table piled high with snacks and drinks for an upcoming event. Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed a handful of potato chips and hurled them into the air like confetti. The chips flew in all directions, causing a wave of gasps and laughter. "Let's party!" Richard shouted, grabbing a few cans of soda and shaking them vigorously. The tension shifted as students turned their attention to him. Before he could think twice, he popped open a can, sending a fizzy spray across the room. Laughter erupted as some students cheered while others shielded themselves. "Richard, stop! You'll get in trouble," Jake shouted, but Richard dove behind the snack table, grabbing gummy bears and flinging them into the air. Suddenly, Miss Miller, the strict cafeteria supervisor, boomed. "What is going on here?" She narrowed her eyes at Richard. "Get out from behind that table!" "Time to run!" Richard yelled, adrenaline surging as he sprinted out from behind the table, slipping past Miss Miller. The students roared with laughter, and he felt like a rock star. Just as he thought he could escape, Principal Johnson appeared in the entrance, disbelief on his face. "Richard, enough with this nonsense. You're in serious trouble." "Can't catch me," Richard taunted, dashing toward the exit with laughter and fear propelling him forward. Bursting into the hallway, he realized he was not alone. Students followed him, many still laughing. "Let's keep this going," Richard shouted, feeling the thrill of the chase. He turned a corner, aiming for the exit leading outside, where chaos could reign supreme. The day was far from over, he thought, adrenaline still coursing through him. What could be more chaotic than this? Richard dashed through the school's main hallway, heart pounding with adrenaline. The laughter and chaos from the cafeteria were still ringing in his ears, but now he needed a plan to stay ahead of the teachers hot on his tail. As he rounded a corner, he spotted the fire exit door at the end of the hall. Freedom awaits. "Richard, come back here!" Principal Johnson's voice boomed from behind him, and the urgency in his tone only fueled Richard's determination. He was not going to let anyone catch him. Not today. "Time to make my move," he shouted, racing toward the door. With one swift motion, he yanked it open and burst outside, the cool air hitting his face like a refreshing wave. He found himself in the school's courtyard, filled with students enjoying their break. Richard's eyes darted around, searching for a place to hide. Then he spotted it, the art supply shed tucked away in a corner, or surrounded by vibrant flower beds and a few picnic tables. It was perfect. "Over here," he called to his friends who had followed him outside. They skidded to a stop, eyes wide with excitement. "Let's go!" Richard shouted, leading the way toward the shed. As they reached the shed, he threw the door open, and the strong smell of paint and varnish wafted out. Inside, it was cramped but filled with art supplies, canvases, brushes, and cans of paint scattered everywhere. Richard could hear footsteps approaching. There was no time to waste. "Quick, in here," he urged, ushering his friends inside. They squeezed into the tiny space just as the sounds of the approaching teachers grew louder. "Did he really think he could get away?" a voice said. It was Ms. Miller, her tone laced with frustration. "Let's check the courtyard." Richard pressed his back against the wall, barely able to contain his laughter. "This is too close," he whispered to Jake, who was beside him, wide-eyed. "Shh! They'll hear you!" Jake whispered back, trying to suppress his own giggles. The sound of footsteps faded as Ms. Miller and a group of teachers moved away, searching the courtyard. Just then, Richard spotted a few cans of brightly colored paint stacked precariously on a shelf above their heads. An idea struck him like a lightning bolt. "What if we gave them a little surprise?" he whispered, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. "Are you serious?" Max asked, eyeing the paint nervously. "We could get in even more trouble." "Exactly, but it'll be epic." Richard shot back, his enthusiasm infectious. "All right, I'm in," Jake said, a hint of rebellion igniting in his eyes. "Let's do it." Richard grabbed a can of blue paint and handed it to Jake. "You take this one. Max, you get the red. I'll take the green. On 3, we launch them out of the shed and into the courtyard." "Wait, what if we miss?" Max asked, looking worried. "We won't miss. Ready? 1, 2, 3. With that, they hurled the cans of paint out of the shed. The bright colors flew through the air, splattering against the walls and the ground in a vibrant display. The courtyard erupted in laughter as students watched the chaos unfold, their faces lighting up with excitement. But just then, the door to the shed swung open, and there stood Principal Johnson, mouth agape at the sight before him. "What in the world is happening here?" he shouted, anger and disbelief mingling in his voice. Richard and his friends exchanged wide-eyed glances, realizing their fun was about to be cut short. "Run!" Richard yelled, bolting from the shed, paint splatters decorating his clothes as he raced across the courtyard. The scene was utter mayhem as students began to laugh and cheer, joining in the fun. With Principal Johnson and Miss Miller in hot pursuit, Richard zigzagged through the crowd, laughter ringing in his ears. The energy in the air was electric, and for a moment, he felt like a rock star, thriving in the chaos he had created. "Let's go!" Richard shouted to his friends, motioning toward the fence separating the school from the park next door. He leaped over the fence, landing on the other side with a triumphant grin. They were free, at least for now. Richard couldn't help but feel a rush of adrenaline as he looked back at the school, where teachers were scrambling to control the chaos he had unleashed. "Best day ever!" he exclaimed, breathless and exhilarated, ready for whatever mischief awaited him next. 11:25 a.m. As Richard sprinted down the hallway, the adrenaline coursing through his veins felt electrifying. He could hear the laughter and chaos from earlier still ringing in his ears, fueling his excitement. He rounded the corner, barely paying attention to his surroundings, when suddenly, disaster struck. In an instant, Richard tripped over his own feet, and time seemed to slow as he tumbled toward the ground. His arms flailed wildly, and he let out a yelp that echoed off the walls. Students around him gasped in unison, their eyes wide with shock as they witnessed the dramatic fall. It was like watching a slow-motion scene in a movie, both tragic and hilariously entertaining. Thud! Richard hit the floor with a resounding crash, sending his backpack flying and scattering his books in all directions. The once lively hallway went silent for a moment, as if everyone was processing the sheer absurdity of it all. "What a way to go!" someone whispered, trying to stifle a laugh. Within seconds, the teachers and security guard closed in around him, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and disbelief. Ms. Miller, the art teacher, was the first to reach him, hands firmly planted on her hips. "Enough of your chaos, Richard," she declared, shaking her head as if she were scolding a naughty puppy. "You've crossed the line today. It's time for a serious punishment." Just then, a wave of rebellion swept through the gathered students, fueled by the day's wild antics. "Let's get him!" they shouted, eyes glinting with mischief. Without a moment's hesitation, they began hurling colorful paint-filled balloons and cups of water in Richard's direction. It was a vibrant assault, an explosion of colors splattering against the walls and onto Richard himself. Richard couldn't help but laugh, his spirit unbroken. "This is insane!" he shouted, trying to dodge the incoming onslaught. He ducked, but the balloons kept coming, painting him in a kaleidoscope of colors. Then, amidst the chaos, Principal Thompson strode forward with a stern expression, his brows knitted in frustration. "I'm calling your mom, and you're getting suspended for 4 weeks!" he boomed, his voice cutting through the laughter like a knife. The severity of his words didn't quite match the colorful chaos surrounding them, creating a hilarious contrast. Still grinning, Richard shrugged. "Well, it was very fun creating chaos, LeMayo," he muttered, his tone lighthearted. "Richard, this is serious!" Mr. Thompson snapped, trying to maintain his authority. He turned to face the gathering crowd, aiming to re-establish order. But just as he did, disaster struck again. This time, it was his own misstep. He tripped over a spilled paint palette that one of Richard's classmates had carelessly tossed aside. With a dramatic flare, Mr. Thompson crashed down, landing right in the middle of the colorful chaos. Paint splattered everywhere, coating him in hues of blue, red, and yellow. The hallway erupted in laughter, students unable to contain their glee at the sight of their principal, now a living canvas of vibrant colors. Richard, still lying on the floor, burst into uncontrollable laughter. "Now that's what I call poetic justice," he exclaimed, tears of laughter streaming down his face. "Enough!" Mr. Thompson barked, his patience clearly wearing thin as he struggled to rise, colorful paint dripping from his clothes. "Just suspend him already!" The students roared with laughter, their cheers echoing in the hallway, drowning out any semblance of authority. Richard realized that despite the impending suspension, he had turned a mundane school day into one of the most chaotic and memorable experiences ever. 11:30 a.m., the fade out. As the laughter continued to swell around him, Richard lay back on the floor, still chuckling at the mayhem he had unleashed. The swirling rainbow of paint surrounded him, a testament to the wildness of the day. The laughter, the chaos, and even the threats of punishment faded into the background as he soaked in the moment. Best day ever, Richard thought, a grin plastered on his face, knowing this would be a story to tell for years to come.